can't hear. Okay. 1 second, technical difficulties.
They're on my desk. Okay. I put it on my desk because I needed to get it involved.
Is that better? Okay. Can you hear me in the back?
A little bit better.
Great. I'm only going to talk for a couple minutes, so. Oh, great. Okay, good evening, everyone. Like I said, there are 2 extra seats if anyone would like to sit. Thank you for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I am Laura Payne. I am the Oakland Town Chair. And as you are all aware, we are here to learn about the recent oil spill at Line 6 at the Enbridge station on Highway 18, just east of here. So since learning of the 69,000 gallon spill, I have had regular conversations with the DNR and Enbridge to ensure that the cleanup and ongoing subsurface investigation is proceeding properly to protect the health and safety of our residents and our natural resources. And our conversations have been very transparent and informative. And I've invited representatives from Enbridge here tonight so our residents can hear firsthand information regarding the spill. We will first have a presentation by Enbridge. We have Shane Yoakum, the Supervisor of Environmental Operations here at the desk, and also John Schwartz, Supervisor of Technical Services. And after the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. So if possible, please refrain from asking questions during the presentation. There'll be plenty of time afterwards so that Oakland residents can ask questions regarding the spill to both Enbridge and the DNR. We have DNR reps Isaac Ross and Trevor Noble here. They'll be moving up to the front later after the presentation from the Remediation and Redevelopment Program. So it's important that all of our residents are heard and have their questions answered. So to accommodate everyone and to have the Q&A run as effectively and as efficiently as possible, please sign up in the back if you would like to ask a question. If you didn't do so already and you decide later that you want to ask a question, that is fine. You can always decide to do it at a later time tonight. And we will just be calling people up so that they can sit at the mic and everyone can be heard. So with that, I would like to introduce Shane and John to start the presentation.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. I appreciate you coming out on a chilly January evening to learn a little bit more about the site. Don't really have a canned presentation in the sense of a slide deck, but I brought a few maps. I wanted to talk through these maps just to give you an idea of the site layout, some of the things we discovered at the site, and just to help put things in perspective, given what you may have read or talked about with some of your neighbors or with the city or DNR or whoever else. So with that, I'll just start off with the site. Let's give it some context here. So it's US Highway 18 up there. It's a couple of miles from here. We're on the south side of the road. The area within the yellow boundary is Enbridge property. It's a little over 8 acres. Within the fence line, which is generally bordered by the graveled area, it's a little over 6 acres. And the yellow star that you see there in approximately the center of the station is the leak source. That building that the star is adjacent to is a pump building. So within that building, there are several large industrial-sized pumps that move oil through the pipeline system. The area right here that's fenced, that's an electrical substation. There's an electrical building there. And this building right there, just south of the star, is a pressure control valve building. Is this not working that well? Or?
No, this is feedback from that.
Oh, okay.
We'll not use it, but
Do you want me to turn this one off? Or?
no, you're fine.
Okay.
That's a separate thing.
Okay. So let's wind the clock back to Veterans Day when this was discovered. It was discovered first thing in the morning, about 6:45. And first order of business when we discover oil. And by discovery of oil, what we saw on the ground was an approximately 2-foot diameter area where the gravel was covered with oil. That's all that we could see. And so first order of business then is to call our control center. The pipeline gets shut down. And I think if you go out and look at the PHMSA reports that are out there, I think it was shut down within about 8 minutes. So the line gets shut down, the station gets isolated, and then the investigation begins. And so given the location of this leak, being adjacent to the building, if you were to zoom in on this on Google Earth, you'll see there's a lot of pipeline appurtenances like valve stems and actuators and stuff that are sticking up out of the gravel. And so in order to begin excavating there, you have to do it with hydro excavation. And so that's high pressure water that's used to dislodge the soil, and then it's vacuumed up as it's dislodged. So you're introducing water into an area that's got oil, and it's a very slow and tedious process to begin excavation. And so within the first couple of days, or within the first day, we exposed the valve that was below grade. So you have to go down about 3 feet to get to the top of the piping that's associated with the valve. The leak was occurring from the bottom side of the valve, so that's another 2 feet down. So really this leak began 5 feet below grade. And so once that was identified that that was where the repair needed to occur, there was additional excavation that went on, and a repair was made by the next afternoon, I believe.
Correct, yes.
And so from that point on, we still have oil in the ground, and so the company philosophy is whenever we have a release, we would like to excavate all impacted soil and remove it. And so we began excavation through hydro excavation, and so over the course of the next 4 weeks, we continued to excavate. So when we discovered this leak, we have 1 hour, according to the PHMSA regulations, to report the release. And so the release was reported, I believe, in about 45 minutes or so. And then we have a 48-hour update. So at the 48-hour mark, we had excavated down and exposed the valve. We knew that it was more than the 2 gallons that we initially had estimated, just given what we saw on the surface. And so our estimation at that time was, well, we got about 3 barrels of oil out of the pipeline at this point, given what we've excavated and what we can see within the excavation. Our next reporting deadline then at that point is a 30-day report to PHMSA. It's a 7,000 report. That's been posted. I think it's uploaded to the BERT site now, so if people want to go take a look at that. And so then, as I described earlier, we began this hydro excavation process. It took us until about the end of the first week in December. Let me jump to this next image here. It took us till about the end of the first week of December to complete the excavation footprint that you see on the screen, the yellow hatched area. At that point in time, we had exposed a significant amount of underground infrastructure. So along the back side of that building within the excavation, there's piping that runs all through there. There's all sorts of valves. There's lots of electrical conduit. And so, as you're excavating, you have to identify where all these are at. In some cases, stuff has to be cribbed up. So it's a very slow process. The blue arrow that you see on there is groundwater flow direction. So we excavated down to about 12 feet below grade, which is the top of the water table in that area. And we excavated to what we felt was practicable given building foundations, other underground infrastructure that we were adjacent to. And so on the western boundary of the excavation and along the southern boundary, including the part that curls up on the east to the bottom side of the building, we still had impacts in the soil. So we had dug down top of water table, and we still had 12 to 18 inches of stained soil along that western boundary and the southern boundary. At that point in time, we had 12 feet, or close to 12 feet of unimpacted soil to move to get at that 12 to 18 inches. And so at that point, we felt like we were at a point of diminishing returns in being able to excavate additional impacted soil. And so now we need to start looking at alternative remedial methods. So end of first week of December, we have a 30-day report due to PHMSA the following week, so due by the 11th of December. And so that week of the 11th, we had coordinated a subsurface investigation where we were doing using a push probe. The push probe had technology on it, laser-induced fluorescence, which as the probe is going into the ground, there's lasers that are shot onto the soil in the ground. And if it's impacted with product, that soil will fluoresce. And it can be identified that you've got product at this location. And so, grab a next photo here. And so beginning on Tuesday, December 10th, we put all these borings in the ground. And so the borings that are just, I guess it's a fluorescent, all these borings, there was no free product in the soil. We went down to 20 feet, so down 8 feet below the top of the water table. No product. And so when you get up around the excavation on the western extent and then on the southern side and then to the east, our borings detected product still in the ground. And so from these borings, we were able to infer what we believe to be the extent of impact, which is denoted by the red line. And so it wasn't until December 11th, about midday, that we had completed these borings, which allowed us to then come up with a reasonable calculation for what we felt the volume out from this release was. And so, probably why we're here this evening is because a lot of people were surprised that we went from 3 barrels out 2 days into the event to an estimate of 1,650 barrels at the 30-day mark. And really the simple answer behind that is that this is all underground. And so it was something that we had to excavate and investigate to be able to come up with a reasonable estimate of what we felt the volume out was. And I think where we didn't do well as a company is communicate that outside the normal regulatory channels. And so there were entities that normally wouldn't be involved with the response that all of a sudden were surprised. And nobody likes surprises, right? Unless it's your birthday or it's Christmas. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are today. And so I just wanted to kind of recount that timeline for everybody so you have a better understanding of how we went from 2 gallons to 3 barrels to 1,650 barrels. So as part of our immediate actions, it was, like I had mentioned, we really like to excavate to get everything. In this case, that's not practicable because of all the infrastructure. And so now we're at a point where we've got to look at alternative methods to recover what's been lost here at Cambridge. And that'll be done in conjunction now with the DNR. We've entered into the remediation program. We're currently preparing a work plan, which they'll review and approve, and then we'll execute under their supervision. Last picture that I wanted to share with you is there was also concern about surface water and potable water. this particular map doesn't show it, but we did sample 2 residents that were near the site. Both were on the north side of the road. And if you consider groundwater flow direction, which is to the south-southeast, if you're on the north side of the road, you're up gradient of any potential impacts. But we did sample those residential wells, and there were no detections. And then we've also sampled the creek that flows adjacent to the facility on the east side. And I don't know if you can make it out too well, but you can see the green dots are the sample locations. And the original sample we collected with the Lake Rickley Management Association was that particular location, and we have since come back and sampled 3 additional locations, and they've all been non-detect for VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, constituents of crude oil.
Just one other thing too. Additionally, we sampled the potable water
Oh,
well on site, which is, you want to point that out, Shane?
Yeah, it's like right there.
Right there, yep.
Yep.
So, and that was no detect either, so.
And I did want to mention one of the safeguards that we do have at this particular facility is we do have 4 Sentinel monitoring wells. And those are, there's one there, there's one up in the corner, there's one there, there's one there. Those get monitored annually. And those were put in back in 2003. So in Canada, there's a requirement for petroleum pump stations to have Sentinel monitoring wells. And Enbridge, being a Canadian-owned company, they extended that requirement, at least for our facilities, throughout the main line, so Wisconsin, Minnesota. So wherever we have facilities where we feel there's a higher risk for groundwater impacts, we'll have these Sentinel monitoring wells, which we monitor annually as a safeguard. In the event we have something like this where it's below grade, it doesn't get detected right away. It's something that happens over a period of time. And these wells are designed to capture that before anything leaves our facility. I think that's pretty much it.
Thank you, Shane.
Yep.
So now that the presentation's over, we'll have people come up and ask questions. I'll invite the DNR to come up here so you can ask questions to whoever you would like, or whoever would like to answer, they can. Thank you. So I'm just going to read off the names, and if you would like, come up. And like I said, if you haven't signed in and you want to ask a question, you are more than welcome to do so. Jerome Cool, did you want to come up? Great, thank you. Yeah, we're just going to have you sit here so that we can hear you on YouTube and the audience can hear you.
There you go. All right, Jerome Cool, West 8290. I own the property, the ditch coming from the north, in the upper right-hand corner there. That's our property. I guess my question is, of the 69,000 gallons that were spilled, what have you recovered and what is left in the ground, percentage or gallons, or however you calculate that?
It's strictly an estimate. So, given the size of the excavation that you saw there, we disposed of about 3,000 tons of soil. And so from a volume perspective, that gets you about 3/4 the size of an Olympic swimming pool, basically, if that's any type of a reference for people. And so we've estimated, and it's just an estimate, that we've recovered close to 60% of the product that's been released.
Okay. And was the product that was released was raw oil?
Yes.
And that will biodegrade over time?
It will, but we're going to help it.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
The biggest concern that we have with what's remaining in the soil is that's a mass of crude oil, and we want to get it out of there. We can't excavate it, but there's other remedial techniques out there that can help us get that mass out of the ground. You get the mass out of the ground, then you don't have to worry about impacts to groundwater. You get the mass low enough residuals. You know, the bugs in the soil are going to chew up some of it once you get the concentrations down.
Yep.
And so we're looking at all those different options that we'll use here in conjunction with you know, experts from the Department of Natural Resources to get the site cleaned up.
Okay. And then it was found by a visual, you know, coming to the surface. Is there other technology that you use in other areas that like the laser that you were talking about, where you have a boring and where you can catch us sooner? Are you using any of that technology other places?
I'll
That's
talk
probably
to
a
that
John
one.
question.
So basically, this is inside the station. As you said, we caught
Right.
this when we were doing our rounds, basically going around checking on things as our technicians do at all the stations. But the piping inside the station has sharper bends, so it doesn't have pipeline inspection tools run through it as the main line does, because they simply can't make it through. But we do have a facility integrity program, and that actually recommends replacing certain components. They look at what there is. We also have cathodic protection on the lines to prevent corrosion to any of the pipelines.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian, Frick, would you like to speak? No? Okay. Okay, Mark. I can't read your writing.
I wrote it tough to read. It's Island Felton, it's W9026 Lakeview Drive.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Well, thanks for coming out tonight. We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
How about now?
This one.
You picked some fun under that one, by the way.
All right, cool.
Just speak up.
All right, cool. I didn't have a lot of time to develop my questions, so thank you for your patience, everybody. So I was really happy to see you drilled the other 20 wells or for groundwater and that kind of stuff. Based upon the evidence you have at the scene, how long had the leak been occurring?
Unknown at this point. It's hard to tell. It was a small release from the flange, so it was hard to tell how long that had been occurring. And being underground, you aren't able to see that.
Okay, and then you had just previously talked about inspection criteria that you do all the time, whether you could or you couldn't, or the infrastructure is tight fitting or whatever. You would obviously have a procedure or a policy in place to inspect this within a certain time period, right? Every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever that is, I don't know, every year. With the amount of volume going through, the inspection prior to the leak did not show a problem, whatever that inspection date was. And then time passed, and then you found it,
Mhm.
right? Based upon the hole in the flange or the gasket or whatever, does the flow rate coming out of that pipe correspond with the volume of material that is said being lost?
So, go.
I mean, I would
And
say
I'm
that
ignorant, so help me out.
well, I would just say that the rate at which the gasket on the flange was leaking, you would not be able to discern a change in flow rate through that pipe,
Sure.
if that makes sense.
If I drill a hole in my boat and I put a bucket of water or a bucket underneath the hole, I can determine the flow rate based upon how much water comes through the hole and ends up in the bucket, right?
Right.
So you guys have a time period in which you inspect, and then you found the leak. And we have a known leak of approximately 1,650 barrels.
Yep.
Right.
And that's an estimate, yep.
Okay, so it's an estimate. So what I'm asking is based upon, if you will, rate times time equals distance, right? If you have a known hole and you have a rate of time or the amount of calendar that has passed, do those two calculations match up with what we have
Oh,
found?
so you're like, want to extrapolate a period
I'm
of time?
trying to
Yeah.
understand, yeah.
So
Okay,
I'll just say that calculation is, it's not as simple as you have a hole, because the line runs at varying pressures,
sure.
and that, where that flange is, that was on,
5 feet
Uh,
underground.
it's
Yep.
5 feet underground.
Yeah.
It's on the discharge of Unit 4. So based on what pressures we're running, or if the line's not running, or if that station's not running, it's gonna be a different release rate, possibly. And what failed was the gasket of the flange, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was a release at a certain pressure, but if it was under that pressure, it may have not released. It was over that pressure, it might have released a little bit more.
I get it.
You-
Yeah, it's a variable. I
It's
get
a
it.
variable.
Yep, no, I
Yeah.
get it, okay. So this question is for the DNR. Is there a third party or other recognized testing entity that you guys are in agreements with, whatever process we have, because I'm ignorant, that is monitoring or being part of this, so everybody understands we have a neutral party who's getting the test results from the sample wells and whatever. Could you extrapolate on that? We have the Enbridge side of this conversation so far, but we don't have any DNR side of the conversation so far. So we would love to, I'm
Oh,
sure
it's a-
everyone would love to hear it.
Yeah, it's a great question. So at this time, the Department of Natural Resources has not collected any samples out there. It is my understanding, and I don't know the exact number of samples that have been collected by the Lake District in collaboration with Enbridge, but they could speak to that. But the Department of Natural Resources has not collected any concurrent third-party samples as part of this discharge.
Is there a plan to do that?
Not at this time. And it's not. It is not typical for the department to take on those types of activities when there is a cooperative and responsible party that's addressing the discharge.
Sure. And everyone's playing nice. I respect that. So I think it was Reagan that said trust but verify.
Yeah, and it's a common question that we do get. It's, are there any other parties that are collecting samples? And then the follow-up is usually who's checking those samples,
Right.
and who's reviewing the material.
And what I'm hearing so far is everything is Enbridge that's doing it.
Aside from some, go
Yeah,
ahead,
I was
Shane.
just
Go
going to
ahead.
add that, like, we have retained an environmental consultant. And so the consultant collects the samples. The samples go to a third-party laboratory. We use PACE Analytical. It's a nationwide lab. And so those lab reports are all available on the BERT system. As part of those analytical procedures, they do all sorts of quality assurance, quality control work. And so you can go on and look at their analytical results.
Sure. Is that
So it's,
going to be publicly available?
yes, and it's out there
Okay.
now.
Okay, great. Now,
Yep.
like I said, I'm completely ignorant, and I haven't found any of that with I have weak Google foo.
But
So,
And if
before
it's-
you leave, we'll set you up with the web address.
Yeah,
to
that's
get
what I
to
was
the
just going
BERT
to
system.
suggest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also have some information on that on our website for everybody,
Oh, cool.
too. So there's the case number that you can have, and there are also some contact information as well.
Also, Mark, our test results are also available there too.
Cool. I appreciate it. That's cool. Okay. Is there a sample of the VOCs or whatever was spilled for, and let's say everything goes great, all right? The cleanup is going good. I imagine there's like you kind of insinuated, there's a weighted response. You can only, I've rented pumper trucks before. I understand how, or vacuum trucks. I understand exactly what you're saying. You have 5 of them lined out there. The money's, you're burning $100 bills, literally. I get it, right? So there becomes a time when it's a weighted.
Well, I would add from a company perspective, there aren't costs pressures for us.
Sure.
It's it's human health and the environment are the first things, and then
Sure.
we worry about the operation and then the cleanup. And so,
Absolutely, and I
and so-
don't think I'm implying otherwise. I just
no,
roll with me for a
but I want to
second.
make that very clear that,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I've been with
'Cause
the company a long time, and it's always, there's
Yeah.
no cost pressures when it comes to cleaning up a leak.
Yeah, so I guess ultimately where I'm going is there a sample of the material that was spilled? So 20 years from now, when I do VOC testing on my well, that I've been doing for years, it's just an annual thing we do, right, because it's water, that I can legally, whether through subpoena or other action, compare that chemical footprint that I find in my well, which I won't because you guys are doing the right thing, and I respect that. But 20 years from now, if I have that happen to my well, that I'll be able to compare it to. 20, 50, whatever it is. Does that exist? Is there a plan for that exist?
Is that a question?
Yeah, I mean, we'll share it with you now. We've got chromatograph information on the crude
Sure.
type that was in the line. We'll share that.
Is it
Yeah,
possible to share it with the township?
Sure.
They can be the keeper. I don't need a record in my basement. I'm good.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's no problem at
I
all.
appreciate that.
All right.
And the only other thing I'd add to that point too is, like we've referenced, we have our Birds on the Web website, public facing. The environmental information that's been collected, that'll also be available. So to your point, because we see this in our program a lot,
Yeah.
we'll have a timestamp 2024. You can go back and that data will still be existing in 2044.
Because I think,
Yep.
I can't speak for the wall of people behind me, right? And I totally understand how there's the time span of reporting, so you automatically look like the bad guy, even though you're
Well,
literally following what you're supposed to do, right?
And I would add to that too, we've gone down the other path before where we've had leaks, and every few days we're given updates on, we're changing the volume because it's a similar situation where
Yeah.
it's below ground. And
Yeah.
then after like the second or third update, you start to look really foolish because you keep changing the number.
Yeah.
And
I-
so we found it's best that if we wait until we are able to do some investigation work and come up with a number that we feel we're comfortable with, that we don't have
Yeah.
to change again.
Yeah, no, I
So if that
I
makes-
understand that there's a weighted response. So
Yep.
as long as we have some way, like I said, I can't speak for the mass of people behind me, but you're trying to meet your reporting requirements, you're trying to do the right things and whatnot, and I understand that. But at the end of the day, we literally drink the water, right? And then and I'm not like Mr. Enbridge, whoever's listening, I'm not implying, but who's to say you don't just pick up stakes 10 years from now and then we still not have bad
Right.
water, right?
Yep.
So that's honestly my concern. So I just appreciate that. So it sounds like we have chemical signatures of whatever was spilled is going to be given to the township. Did I hear that right?
Yes. Yeah, and it'll also be on the
Everything that
DNR.
is submitted to us is uploaded to that publicly available website. So if there's anything, it's all open records, right? No matter what we
Yeah.
get, it's an open record. But what we do is we're very diligent on anything we receive, getting it up for public consumption as soon as possible.
All right.
Helps everyone.
And then the sample time for the tests, because we drilled all those new sample stations, right? And I think I
Yep,
heard.
those are all temporary. Yep.
Okay. So
We will be, I mean, as part of the long-term remediation, we will be putting in permanent monitoring wells.
So you're going to add more wells beyond the Sentinel wells you have on site now?
Yeah, they'll be nested in with the Sentinel wells
Okay.
along the
And
property line.
does the DNR agree that annual sampling is an adequate time span for sampling, for tracking movement? Or-
Well, I think there's two different things. If
Yeah.
you want to speak to the frequency of what Enbridge does as far as Sentinel well monitoring, like compliance monitoring that you have, that wouldn't be something that we could speak to. But from a remedial standpoint, we can talk about that. So when you talk about your plans.
You go for it. You
But
guys go
I
for it.
think your question is, it'll be a lot more frequently than annually, because now we're in an active remediation. It's going to be happening on a regular frequency.
Okay. So, does that meet
It-
your
it-
standards?
No, it does, and they're still providing and putting together all of the data that's been collected so we can evaluate what everything means. So they're understanding what's going on out there, they're submitting it to us for our evaluation. Part of remediating the ground, and Shane alluded to that as far as some of the material that's still there, is that data helps them evaluate, or helps any responsible party evaluate what can be done to remove any of that residual contamination. So that can change as an investigation or remedial actions transpire. Is they may need more monitoring, they could do less monitoring, but they're still working through those phases, that iterative process, that site investigation.
Okay.
And I guess
Go
one thing I'd like to stress too is like what we've talked about this evening, those have just been immediate actions.
Right.
And so now we're moving into a remedial process with the state. And so it'll be much more regimented. There'll be a work plan in place that we'll follow. The work plan will be publicly available, so you'll be able to see what our plans are. And so these have just been immediate reaction, immediate,
Yeah.
yeah, right?
Yeah,
And Shane, that's a good.
incident happens, you open the book, find the thing, go here, this is our response, make your notification.
Yeah,
I understand.
immediate actions.
Yeah.
We need to recover oil, right? That's the immediate
Yeah.
action. And so now it's time to design a cleanup for this site, given the complexities and everything that we're dealing with.
Right,
Absolutely.
and that will be something that will be included in the information that's been completed to date, the plan that will be submitted. And just to comment generally on these remediation plans is monitoring can change based on a remedial action. If there's like an injection event at a site where you need to monitor for additional constituents to see how that remedial action's performing. So it can vary over time, and it really depends on what's submitted to us for the review.
Okay, and based upon what I just heard, you haven't got anything submitted for review yet, because we're still so early.
Not the work plan that we're talking
No,
about.
that was immediate action, I understand.
I believe if you read the responsible party letter that we received from the DNR, our work plan is due, I think, February 17th. Right.
Okay.
Is the date, so
Yeah, no, I haven't.
we're working on that right now. Yep.
Okay, cool. We talked about the alternate methods for remediation, so you've done a substantial amount of work physically removing the, I'll say, contaminated, material, substrate from the location. Could you go into a little bit more detail on the remediation? I'm expecting to hear something about microbes or whatever you're going to be doing, right?
So, I mean, this has to be approved, but, I mean, we're looking at a couple of different things. One, we're looking at some additional excavation work along the south end of the building. Let me get my laser pointer. So we're looking at a little bit of additional excavation, possibly in this area. It's something that we have to discuss with operations yet. And then for the outlying areas, within the red here, we're looking at soil vapor extraction. It's probably the most efficient way to get the remaining mass out of the soil.
Okay. And based upon the information you have available, I mean, we're sitting here in a public forum, so it's all relative, right?
Yep.
I mean, we don't have tables in front of us. Based upon the information you have available and what now, and what you have just described, what is your time frame to complete those actions successfully?
We
1
haven't.
year,
We
2
haven't.
years, 5
well,
years? What have you done in the past?
I would say 2 years.
Okay.
I don't know how. Usually, like within Enbridge, so I do environmental compliance for operations.
Sure.
Typically, when we get into projects like this, it goes to our remediation department, which this one will at some point in time, probably later this year. But I would say a couple of years.
Okay, so it's reasonable for us to, I'm not going to say expect, but if we were going to float a gray line in our heads, a 2-year time stamp would be a generally reasonable.
That seems reasonable, yeah.
Okay, I hadn't heard that before, so I just want to make sure everyone knows that. So,
Yeah.
okay.
And again, that's just an estimate. Like we haven't engineered the system yet, and so once we do that, we'll be able to determine like what kind of mass that we'll get out of the soil, and then we can come up with a much better timeline on how long we think the system will have to operate.
Okay, and then for the DNR, based upon.
So that's totally just based on my experience over the years
Sure.
and with similar situations.
Okay. Based upon what we've heard so far and the alternate remediations technologies and activities we're expecting to come forth, do we have other water contaminant issues we need to be concerned about? Example, and I'm going to go left field here, DDT, eagles, mice, you know, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Now, of course, that's not this, right? We all know that. The technologies that Enbridge would use to do the alternate remediation activities, isn't it reasonable to say that we would not have any downstream effects to our water table and our lake?
So you're referring to maybe like secondary effects from
Absolutely.
treatment? That's part of the evaluation that'll be made as they address what would work best for the constituents. So generally speaking, our program, the responsible party identifies their current discharge. So it would be the constituents that are associated with the crude oil or whatever was discharged at a site. Part of an injection event, they need to get a special injection permit to be approved so secondary effects don't occur. So part of the remedial action plan is to monitor for and evaluate all of these options so there aren't those issues identified down the line. DDT being it's a good example for an old agrochemical.
Crystal clear, no eagles.
They would be responsible at this time for identifying any constituents that would be associated with that identified discharge. Hypothetically speaking, if it was an old industrial facility that may have manufactured agrochemicals or DDT, that might be something different, but that's not what's here.
Yeah, it's current now.
Right, and there are other breakdown products that can occur from any discharge, but that's also wrapped into any remedial action planning for consideration. So remedial action plan's one, and then monitoring to show that it's working is another.
Sure. Thank you. My last
I hope that
question-
answered that question.
Well,
Okay.
and along
Go
the
ahead.
potable well conversation, the other thing to keep in mind too is that you are up gradient from a groundwater flow direction. Your well is also much deeper than what we're talking about here. So I don't know if you happen to have your well log, you can I think you can look it up on the state, but you're probably a couple 100 feet deep.
No,
How deep are you, do you know?
60 feet.
Okay.
So I'm within the gray margin of error. I understand the water's going the other way
Yeah.
according to
Well,
the
and
slide.
that groundwater flow direction, is based on measurements that we take in those Sentinel wells every year.
Sure.
That we've been taking since 2003, I believe.
Sure, put a marker here,
So-
detect it here, that's the way it's going. I
So
get
we're
it.
very confident in the groundwater flow direction. It may swing a little bit annually,
Mhm.
but it's generally a south direction, south-southeast.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
And funny enough, a lot of my precursor questions, you already answered, so thank you. So, thank you for your time, I appreciate it,
Okay.
and I'm good.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tudin?
Thank you. Madam Chair and Mr. Yocum and Mr. Schwartz, and I didn't catch your name.
Trevor Noble.
Trevor Noble?
Yep.
Isaac Ross.
Isaac Ross, okay, I have your note here. I live at W9271 Ripley Road, and first off, you just talked about the flow direction as determined from your Sentinel wells as being south and east. This leak is right in the middle of the watershed. And the watershed, of course, goes to Lake Ripley. So you're not here telling us that the movement of your oil in the groundwater is going to continue southeast as it leaves your property, are you?
No.
Okay. You don't have any information on where it would go except generally what might constitute the watershed at this point. You haven't monitored a single well off of your property.
Nope.
Okay. Now, just following up, because there's a couple of things I didn't understand. Mr. Ross, you had prepared a memo December 20th, and it said you had observed 25 temporary wells. You spoke of borings. Are those the same?
It's the same, one and the same.
Okay.
Yep, just different terminology.
Okay, and you've monitored some of the boring wells, and when you started your presentation, you told us about finding contaminant in some of those borings. Could you again?
Yep, so with the laser-induced fluorescence technology, it
Right.
looks for product in the soil. And so that was identified at those locations that were within the red line.
It's within the red line.
Within the red line, yes.
And was there any movement from one well to another? In other words, have you determined that the contamination is moving southeast?
No, we haven't determined that
You
it's
haven't.
moving.
Okay. Quick question. You said you've recovered 60% of the product, and I've read
And
that
that's
in
just
some of the
it's
things.
just an estimate based on the excavation.
Okay. What I read also was that you recovered 1,000 gallons of product which was returned to your pipeline. 1,000 gallons subtracted from 70,000, my math doesn't come up to 60%.
No, that 1,000 gallons was from the hydro excavation.
Okay.
And so we can't send that soil that we excavate through hydro excavation
Okay.
to the landfill. It has to be solidified first.
My time's real short. If
that's
I
fine,
understand
but-
your answer, the remainder of what would be an additional 41,000 gallons of recovered product was in the spoils that you removed?
Yep.
And that was incinerated somewhere, and so it's gone?
No, that was landfill.
Landfill, okay.
Yeah, Deer Creek landfill, waste management landfill.
Okay. Now, getting to your estimate, what we have so far is that your field estimation of what was lost is not based upon the rate of the leak or a time increment over which a known quantity was leaking.
That was based on visual observation.
Instead, what was reported here was that Enbridge had determined, based upon field investigation, observations, and data available at the time. Now, in the industry, is that the best way to determine the amount of product that's leaked?
Under these circumstances, it is.
Is the circumstances you're talking about that you don't know how long it was leaking?
We just know it was leaking for a period of time. We don't. Yeah, we don't
Okay.
have an exact.
This
period of time.
flange that failed was installed in 1973?
Yep, I
Is
think
that
that's
correct?
That's correct, yes.
All right. I have a friend who told me that he worked for the DNR in the early 70s and that there was an oil leak at this same location in the early 70s. Now, I would like to ask both of you to check records. You're such young people that I know you couldn't have been there in the early 70s, but if there are records of what happened in the early 70s, what quantities were released, and where the plume went, I think we would like to know that, so we know what to expect from this plume. Can that be done?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, I really appreciate that. Now, the flange that failed, that was under the same pressure as the pipeline?
So the flange that failed was on the station header, which is on basically the same pressure of the pipeline.
Okay.
So
And it went up and it went down, I got that.
yeah, exactly.
Okay, now, I understand that in 2014, Enbridge applied to the DNR for a permit to increase the pressure on the pipeline that already existed. And in fact, it was to increase the flow of the material through the pipeline. Are you familiar with that?
Which line was that?
Well, the article that I have here, you're free to take a look at it, says that it was the pipeline all the way from Superior to the Illinois state line, which I assume includes this line 6.
So-
Correct me if I'm wrong.
So there's actually 4 lines that traverse the station. There's line 6, line 14, line 61, which are crude lines, and line 13, which is a
Okay.
condensate line that goes north.
Okay, now I don't want to get bogged down on things that I'm not clear about. So if line 6 was in fact increased in pressure to take 3 times the product that was originally going through that line by a permit issued in 2014 and fully implemented by 2016, I would like to know that, and I would like to have the company provide whatever information you have on that to the township if it's possible, as well as the DNR. Now, here's the reason. If the pressure was increased, clearly the flange was already in place. Are these flanges pressure rated?
So
Of course.
let me address your part of your first question. So in that time frame that you were talking about, our line 61 did add additional pump stations. So I think that permit that you're speaking of is not even the same line.
It doesn't say what line specifically, and I'm working with very little information.
Correct.
Can I
But-
see your article?
Sure.
Maybe I can recognize some keywords. or
Yeah, if
something.
it says 42-inch diameter, it's probably line 61.
While he's doing that, for the permit, and I realize
I
we
think it
don't
would
know
be
right now
61
if the
that-
permit.
Yes,
That
th-
flow
so,
rate.
so this article is regarding line 61. So that is
Just
not
looking at
the
the flow
same
rate.
line.
So your line 6 had no change in pressure?
Not like that one, no.
Well, in terms of the change in pressure to move more product, I mean, obviously, my question is, did you break the valve by increasing the pressure?
No, we
All right.
we run to regulated pressures. We are regulated by PHMSA, and we have pressure allowables that we are allowed to
Okay.
run to,
Then,
and that's what we run to.
then my question goes back to the gentleman before me. How often do you inspect a valve like this? And where are those inspection records if you have them?
So the flange that released is not a valve.
Well, it's called a valve sometimes, and it's called a flange sometimes.
So-
Flange is correct?
Flange.
I
Yes.
apologize.
Yep.
Explain what the flange is.
So yeah, basically what a flange is it's two pieces of pipe come together, and on the ends there's a bolt circle to attach those two pieces of pipe. There's bolts that are put through both of those circles, and in between there is a gasket, similar to basically mating two parts on an engine together. You have
Isn't
gaskets on your engine.
Isn't 50 years a long time to have a flange in place without changing it?
They're spiral wound gaskets, and if they're installed correctly, they
Okay,
they
is there
last.
an inspection protocol at all that you keep that would tell you if the flange was sound? The second question is, do you have an inspection protocol for your leak detection equipment, which I understand in this case was non-functional?
That's not correct.
Well, it's what the reporting articles have said. Would you like to correct that?
So the leak detection equipment that we have was functional. It's not going to catch the small release that this was, especially where it was.
So 70,000 gallons escaped your leak detection equipment
Over-
because it was happening very slowly.
It's basically the same as if you have, I'm trying to put this in terms that everybody would understand here, but if you would have a small leak on a pipe in your house, let's say it's a drip every day or something like that, would you notice it right away?
I'm not in the oil business, and if
Uh,
I lost 70,000 gallons, I mean, really? You put a swimming pool full of oil in a hole on your property. So far, you say it hasn't moved from your property, and yet it apparently moved up 5 feet from the leak through compacted materials to finally reach the surface. It sure as heck went down a lot faster than it was going up.
But you have to remember the groundwater is very shallow, and so
Yeah.
it only went down to the groundwater.
Yeah.
Yep, oil and water don't mix.
I think we're all very concerned about the groundwater. We have wells, and we have a very important lake. And this watershed diagram tells us that your spill is going to head toward the lake. Now, does the DNR have any words of comfort that this spill will not reach Lake Ripley?
So, a question that I've answered many times is the need for monitoring out there. And the information that's been provided to the department at this time does not show any off-property impacts at this time. And one of the obligations that they will have is to continue to monitor to try to understand where the discharge has migrated to. As Jane had said, first and foremost is human health and the environment. In a lot of these cases, you establish if there's a human health threat. We look at receptors first, like private drinking water wells, the surface water receptor, the lake itself, and then obviously as part of this investigation and then subsequent remedial actions is to monitor. So it's not like any of these cases, it's not a one and done. There's continuing monitoring and evaluation that goes in to ensure that the discharge is understood and the discharge is being cleaned up, and then those receptors are continuing to be protected.
So you don't
And that's
know-
what we review. Well, at this time, the data that we've been provided shows that it's contained to that area that they have
I
shown.
would expect the answers you don't know.
I
Okay?
can only respond to the facts and the data that we have at
Okay.
this time.
But you yourself went down to the lake to check to see if the oil reached the lake.
Correct. The DNR team has been there a number of times to confirm that
So you have a concern that it may reach the lake.
receptors are one of the first things that we try to address. So making sure that nothing has changed is something that not only the responsible party has done, but I believe the Lake District, can't speak for them, but they've made sure that at least the surficial or any of the free product observations can be made, as well as the department.
Why have there been no monitoring wells drilled outside of the perimeter of Enbridge's property? Enbridge has repeatedly said that the product has not left their property, but there's no testing off-site, off of their property.
Well, and I can speak to the process that is site investigation. I don't know if, Shane, if you want to comment on anything that may be already proposed, because I don't want to stifle anything that may be in the plan, but any site that's being investigated, it's an iterative process where if you identify a discharge area, it is very common and typical to address the discharge and step out, and
Right.
then address it and then step out.
Right.
And they've reached a point where, based on the information, that they've reached the sentinel wells and those temporary monitoring points to show we have an understanding of where this may be, but they're going to continue to monitor. So if they were to pick up any type of contaminant and report it to us, the expectation would be to address that. And at this time, based on the data, it doesn't warrant that.
I think I understand.
Yeah.
Just comparing perhaps the wrong kind of fruit to each other. In 2019, there was an Enbridge leak in Fort Atkinson. There were 27 wells drilled. Now, it seems when you lose 58 times more product, that we'd expect more wells than what I see on that chart
Yet
for
there were-
this spill than the Fort Atkinson spill. Now, I get your idea that maybe you will if the first ones show that it's moving. That's not much comfort. I thank you for your time. I know there's a lot of people behind me.
Thank you. Mrs. Tuden. You're okay? Okay, thank you. Okay, Jimmy.
Yeah, I just got a couple follow-up questions. First of all, thank you so much for working with the Lake District as much as you have and the information you have given us and allowed us to be working with you and being transparent with us.
Well, we hope to continue to work with you
Thank
as
you.
well.
My question gets more back to the mechanics of this flange. Over time, these flanges, obviously with product running through them, must vibrate. And of course, that'll cause whatever that connector material is between the flange to eventually fail. There must be a lifespan on the flange. Is there anything we can do in addition to whatever the rules are, or whatever the DNR says, or whatever the standards of the oil companies say? Is there anything we can do in addition to put monitoring that will catch a potential failure in a flange? Because we're so close to the inlet creek and the lake, something additional to what we're currently not doing. Something that would pick up a leak, like you said, it wasn't able to be picked up or identified or noticed or whatever. Can we do additional things to make sure that we catch this much sooner because of the sensitivity of the issue here?
Do you want to comment from your side first? Or?
Well, to be honest, I think it's really an Enbridge
Yeah,
question, right? It's not something that it would be, if anything, and you guys can correct me, more of a PHMSA federal regulation, because we wouldn't regulate that.
Can you go above and beyond the regulation to help us here because it's so close to the lake?
We do go above and beyond a lot of regulations in everything that we do already.
But as far as this flange issue, because if these things are so old, there's probably going to be more failures, and we need to catch it sooner.
And I will say also that the graphic isn't up there, but not all the connections are flanges at this site either. So basically, looking at units 1, 2, 3, those are welded connections. And then unit 4 was added on, and that's where the flanges were added.
Well, I know a little bit about welded connections on flanges, and I know with vibration, they can cause stress, and over time, that stress becomes cracked. So
And-
is
and
there
that-
anything additional, is what I'm asking, can we put in the ground or underneath the area?
It's
that would
something that we
catch
can
this?
definitely have facilities integrity look at.
I appreciate that. That would
Yep.
be much help, because the sooner we get to the problem, the faster we can fix it. And if there's gonna be this delay because the current system doesn't catch it in time, that's gonna be helpful. Obviously, it's gonna be more costly, but in the end, is it really more costly? If we can catch it within a week or a day or whatever. So
Understand.
if there's additional things that can be added, please look at that. Advice from the DNR, I know it may not be a regulation. Are there things that we can put in place that can regulate it when it's so close to the inlet stream and the lake? So those are things that we need to look at moving forward.
And as a proactive measure too already, other stations that we have in our control, we've taken a look at any flanges that we have of the same era, same vintage, and that work is actually already started. So it's not like we just said, oh, Cambridge is a one-off. We're taking a proactive measure to make sure that we're going to our other facilities that have the same vintage, same connections, and taking a look at those facilities.
But I think we can come up with something that addresses your concern. Whether it be a shallow monitoring pipe of some kind or something like that.
Anything's helpful. Thank you for all your work, you guys, okay? Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Where's Georgia? Oh, Georgia?
My name is Georgia Gomez-Ibanez, and I live at W9659 North Street. And my question has mostly been answered, so I think it's more of a plea at this point. My question was going to be, are you installing monitoring wells? What I would like to see is a lot more monitoring wells between the spill or your site and the inlet creek and the lake. So it's no longer a question, but a hope. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Georgia.
you.
I'll just go down to people who had mentioned they may want to. Pam Dollard, you're good? Okay, thank you. And Dennis and Paula Capaccio, you weren't sure? Did you want to, you're good? Okay, great. And Jane Pfeiffer, you weren't sure? Would you like to speak? You're good? Okay, thank you. And Brent Spler, you're good? Okay. And Chris and Anna Cassidy, would you like to come up?
Hi there.
Anna Cassidy. So it's not my preliminary question, but all this talk of monitoring wells brought to mind another question first, which is, have you been testing wells or groundwater on this property before the spill?
Yes.
Going back.
Back
so
to
do you
2003.
Okay, so you have historical data?
Yep. Yeah, from all the, well, it's not on this picture, but one of the previous pictures, do you remember seeing the black and white? Yeah, we've got 4 wells that we've been monitoring since they were installed in 2003.
Every 6 months or?
Once a year.
Once a year, okay.
Once a year,
And then when you said that you tested again, and then you have all these boring holes, and you said the VOCs were non-detect, is that 0 for all VOCs or just below the EPA's maximum containment level?
For the monitoring wells, or for you talking about for the borings?
Yeah, either.
So for the borings, the concentrations that where we had groundwater concentrations above the PELs at the Wisconsin cleanup criteria, cleanup action, were these two.
So they were what? They were below, you're saying a
So they were, those two,
state
the
level?
two with the red were above the state's cleanup criteria,
Okay,
which indicates that we have some groundwater impacts in this area.
right, and do we have historical data to compare that to that says it's higher?
Yes.
And then the ones outside, even if they are below the maximum containment levels, or if it's state or whatnot, do we know if historically, though, it's higher than it was before this spill, just that it's still below the levels required by law, but higher than they have been historically? Has there been a raise?
It might be helpful to explain like non-detection and detection limits for a laboratory, and then like what the state standards or like an MCL would be, because you're saying non-detect, which would be below, you know, the laboratory detection or the detection limits for the laboratory.
Right, because that's not zero, and I don't want
Right.
people to think that that means there are zero contaminants in it.
Right.
And then that's different than like an MCL or an
MCL.
enforcement standard, which is
Right.
that you cannot.
Yep. So,
Yeah.
Right,
So,
and then
so
a-
these
a
two are.
goal one.
So those two are above enforcement standards.
Right, and then the ones outside of that, even though they're below enforcement standards, are they higher than they were before the leak?
Well,
Do we have a trend going up?
those.
I mean, it'd be hard to believe that there's zero for VOCs, period, because water often contains VOCs.
Right. So these had what I would call detections that are below the J value.
Right. J flag. Yeah.
J flag, which means the laboratory doesn't know, they know that there's something there, but they can't measure it.
Right, but is that higher than it was before the leak?
Well, these weren't installed before the leak.
Okay, so we don't have anywhere outside of that to measure against.
Right.
Just the sentinel wells, right?
Just
Just
the
the
sentinel
Yeah, the
wells.
four
Yeah.
bedpost wells.
And those, I
It-
forgot where they are, but would those help us determine if there's any increase? Because like people have said, if it's, you know, been leaking slowly over a period of time, these perimeters, you'd worry about any kind of raise, even if it isn't, you know, I would expect that the ones within the red boundary would be significantly higher.
Right.
Because they're closer
'cause
to
they're
that
close to the
site, but
source,
doesn't
yep.
mean that it's not, you know, I don't know what the word would be for that, but you know, the plume has
Yeah,
moved, just not as a
there's-
higher concentration.
Right.
So we don't have that data to compare?
There's no difference. I
No
guess is what-
difference
between
in,
the Sentinel well data and the data from the borings.
okay, and the Sentinel wells were where, if you don't mind pointing them out?
Let me go back and grab the picture so you can see.
Sorry.
There was only one Sentinel well that was down in that corner. Oh, here we go. So it was,
Right there.
yeah, right, shot right there.
Okay,
So the other ones here, here, here,
so
You know,
those are
obviously
pretty far
you're-
outside of the
yeah,
boundary of
yep.
the borings.
right?
Correct.
Okay, so that's not gonna give us a lot of information about the change.
Right, because they're outside, yep.
Okay,
So that's typically the way the program's set up is we do 4 wells. That allows us to measure elevation, figure groundwater flow direction, and then kind of have all the like cardinal directions covered, north, south, east, west.
but that's not to say, right, in time that, are you planning to increase the frequency of testing of the
Yes.
Sentinel wells?
Yes, yep. So that was the first thing we sampled right away, Sentinel wells, potable well at the facility. And as part of the remediation now, we'll be installing a number, I don't know how many yet, but there'll be a number of additional monitoring wells that'll focus, you know, along this eastern and southern boundary.
And what will be the standard to determine, I mean, because like we've established, there is a safe level and a not safe level,
Right,
but there's also something to be said of what we were at before versus any kind of increase within your boundary.
yep.
So will that be taken into account, or is it just gonna be sent over that we're still non-detect, we're still safe?
No, we'll continue to monitor the other wells.
Right, but
Yeah.
I guess my question is, what's the standard that's gonna be considered safe comparatively? Because I feel like at this point, any increase,
Well, I think now that whole issue becomes part of our work plan.
Okay.
And the monitoring will be prescribed in the work plan in terms of
Mhm.
frequency, what the action levels are.
and then in terms of, action plan and all that, has the EPA been notified? Do we qualify as a
Yeah.
Superfund?
No, we wouldn't qualify as a super fund.
But has anyone?
The EPA's been notified.
Okay.
And that was kind of, I think part of the reason why we're all here tonight was the whole surprise of us having the 3 barrels, and then we do this investigation work and go to 1,650 barrels. Well, that surprised the EPA too, and they weren't very happy about it. But the EPA has been out onto the site with Isaac.
Okay, so they have been
So
here.
they have been to the site. I think they felt that, based on their site visit, that this site should remain with the DNR, with oversight from the DNR.
Yep, that's correct. And I conducted that site visit with EPA, I think that was December 20th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And they had 2 individuals, and same thing that we did in that memo that was discussed. Visual observations, what the drainage pathway is for the site surficially, and then those visual observations along the creek as well as Lake Ripley. And as Shane had mentioned, typically what works in federal, state regulations without too much weeds is states always handle their, remediation investigations cleanup until it gets to a point that either the state can't or it's a large investigation, and that's where federal agencies then come in to help.
Or citizens lodge complaints and stuff as well, right?
Pardon?
Or
They
citizens
would like a
also
lodge
can
complaint.
Oh,
report
yeah,
to the
yes,
EPA
yeah,
that
yeah,
they have
absolutely.
concerns and questions about how it's being handled.
Yep.
Not that I do
Yep.
right now, just letting everyone know if you do. But the DNR is not going to do any independent monitoring. It's all going to be Enbridge's, and they're not going to make any perimeter outside of that to independently monitor, except for Lake Ripley.
Well, it depends what they provide in a work plan. And as I said before, it's an iterative process, and you step out as you identify more information and you evaluate that. So they're just making their way through that process, so we'll see what's included within that work plan as they understand the discharge and the most effective remedial techniques. And one thing I didn't mention before is the remedial techniques that have been suggested, or there was injection or some biologics.
And those have to be approved. Yeah.
Correct, and SVE, all of that has to be approved too. So SVE is soil vapor extraction. It is proved to be a very effective technique, but I've worked in it a long time, and it's not for but that's something that a responsible party has to show us, is that here's what happened, here's the data we collected, and here's why this is going to work, and here's why this is an option. We call it a remedial action options report. It's right in our administrative code as far as working through that process. And that monitoring frequency is baked into that as well.
Okay. And then final question. Do you, after listening to that, I'm just curious, is there a point where the DNR does anything themselves? Or is it always we review and approve their remediation plans? Or is there ever, we step in and we take our own steps? Or is that like the town's job? I mean, whose job? Does anyone else get oversight over that? And does anyone else get involved or make their own steps, their own perimeters around this?
So the department, as I mentioned earlier, the department doesn't have any intention of collecting samples at this time.
Is that something they do, though? I guess is what I'm asking. Does the DNR, I don't understand how they...
So the way our state statute administrative code reads is the responsible party is responsible for addressing the discharge of a hazardous substance to the environment.
Direct.
So what we do is the responsible party consults with environmental professional, and those environmental professionals are licensed and have a code requirement, which is NR 712, to meet specific standards as an environmental professional to complete work on behalf of a responsible party. Those I was a consultant for half of my career, so I understand both sides. They put they do the data collection on behalf of their client, they put the reports together, sign and seal them, deliver to us for the thorough review, evaluation, comments, and hopefully subsequent approvals. But it's a stepped process through NR 700.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
But we do review and approve those.
And do you work with the town of Oakland or like the Lake Ripley? Do they get to find out what's going on? Do we have
Yeah.
everything will be shared, and so if then their professional judgment, they feel like they want boots on the ground and want to do their own testing based on this data.
Yeah, we couldn't stop anyone from collecting any samples.
Just curious about
Yeah,
transparency.
yeah.
The Lake
Juliana is in the meetings with
Okay, good.
Yep.
Enbridge and the DNR in every meeting that they have moving forward.
Okay.
And they've invited us, and we've asked, and they've been very good that way.
Okay,
And the
good.
town, I go to the meetings too,
Yeah.
so they're very informative about what's been happening, give us all the information. We have some people here from the county, and they are also involved. So we understand the process that they're going through, and that's information then like on our website and on the county's website and the Lake District. We update people, so there are some updates on there. So when things happen that are pertinent and that you should we want to make the community aware of, we'll
Yeah.
put that on the website. So, and then I also have had separate conversations, and I'm sure everyone else has too, to just ask questions, and everyone's been really,
That's good. Yeah, I just want to make sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
so are
we
the
do that.
local, people that are living here also involved in the process. and
Right.
not- okay.
but they're the regulators who will
Right.
make those decisions, and
But we won't be shut out from knowing what's
no,
happening.
no, we won't be shut out.
Okay.
Everyone has been very accommodating and transparent to us.
Yep.
All right. Well, I appreciate. I think my husband has questions too. I
Yeah.
put our names down together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim. Most of my questions have been asked and answered, so I just really have one left at this point. Most of the reference to what's been spilled I've heard is product, crude oil, etc. But correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not just crude oil that moves through those pipes, correct?
It is crude oil. and-
So there's
Yep.
no corrosion inhibitors that move through those pipes?
No.
Okay. So
It's crude oil. The only thing that gets added to it is what's going in our line going north, which is condensate, and that makes it less viscous to pump, makes it easier to pump, basically.
So there is no corrosion inhibitors being leaked into the groundwater?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Linda Dykoff? Do you want to?
I'm Linda Dickoff. I live at W8596 Highway 18, so I'm just down the road between a quarter and a half a mile.
Are you to the east or
West.
west? Okay.
You said that you
okay.
tested some wells. How many residential property owners' wells did you test?
Two.
Two?
Yep, we offered to all landowners who were immediately adjacent to us, and 2 of those residences took us up on our offer.
Why didn't you go a little further?
We felt based on the circumstances of the release that it was only prudent to test or offer testing to landowners who were immediately adjacent to us.
Okay, we don't know what's going to happen down the road 10, 15, 20 years from now. So basically, you will not test any property owners if we request it?
If you requested it, we probably would. But the issue that we always run into is that all of a sudden we're getting people 10 or 15 miles away that want to have their potable well tested because of someone they talked to or what they read in the newspaper. And so it just explodes in a sense. And so we felt, given our professional judgment, that it was only prudent to offer it to people that lived immediately adjacent.
My concern is with being as close as I am, I feel that we should have a baseline as to what it is right now. Suppose we go to sell our place. You can't guarantee me that none of this is gonna affect us down the road?
You're to the north and east?
I'm on the opposite side of the road, just
To-
before Highway A.
To the
Yeah.
west.
Oh, to the west. Okay.
Yes, across from the gravel pit.
Okay. Down by the speedway? There's gravel pit in the speedway?
No, the other way,
Other way?
Other way.
Okay.
the other way.
Towards the town hall here.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So basically, you're saying if I want to know what it is, we have to take the cost and do it ourselves to have a baseline? they use one, do a water testing for us now?
Well, if you, I mean, have you, do you get contacted by our land agents?
No,
Okay.
I've never been contacted about the spill at all.
Okay, well, if you'd like to leave your contact information with me tonight, I'll give you a call.
Okay.
All right.
Did you want to speak about the water?
Can I
Okay.
Anything
Yeah, just
specific?
be careful
No,
with
just-
Oh, okay.
cables and everything. It's a huge trip hazard.
Okay. Rich Strotzer?
Yeah, no, it's, yep.
Maybe put your phone number in there too. It's gonna say Linda.
Is that a mobile phone? Okay, I'll get a hold of that.
Yep.
Okay.
No, appreciate it, thank you.
Yep,
Linda.
give me a call.
All right, I just got a couple questions. I drive by that site very regularly. I know there's been a lot of activity there since you guys had this issue, always vehicles there. But I know you said you do rounds pretty regularly at running by there, and then you found it. Do you know how, like, when the last time was? Obviously, you said you found it on, I believe, the November the 11th.
Yeah, that,
So when was the last time, the time prior to the 11th that you guys had people on site?
So there's actually somebody that's stationed on that site every day.
Okay, I just don't see
I
vehicles
mean,
there that often.
They may go to a different station to
Yep.
help out on something, but there is somebody assigned to that station on a daily basis.
Okay, you guys go there daily then?
Yep.
Okay. I drive by there. I'm not saying I drive by there when they're there, but I just know there's always vehicles there now, and, very rare that I see vehicles there in the past. Okay.
Yeah, and it just depends. Usually,
Yeah, I know.
it's
I
one
know.
one person on site.
Right, and they're not gonna be there for 8-hour period probably, but whatever, they're there for a
They're
period.
they usually are.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And then, I know you were mentioning that that's a pressured line. What pressure is normal pressure on that line when you're running it?
So when it's running at that discharge flange, there it's approximately 350 psi.
Okay.
If I
great.
remember correctly.
Sure, okay, I just want, and then what was the size of that pipe? Is it like 16 or?
No, it's I believe it's 30 inches
Okay.
at
Alright.
that point. The
Sure.
the main line is 34 inches, but it actually gets smaller inside the stations, and I believe it's 30 if I recall correctly.
Sure, okay. And then, is there any more that you guys know of? Obviously, there's that one pipe flange on that valve. Is there many more valves? Because, you got a lot of pipes coming in and out of that. But is that just that one line where you had the one valve? There's, like when you showed the overview and you look at the pictures where you guys excavated, is there a lot more
So
valves and stuff
basically
still
the-
in the ground, obviously, right there?
Yeah, so this building has 4 units
Yep.
in it, and each unit has a suction and discharge pipe that comes out of the building.
But that's all on that same line, right?
That's all on that same
That
line.
line comes into the building on the south end, right? And then it goes
Yep.
out on the north end, but you're
Actually,
constantly
exactly. Oops, can you flip
And there
that
may
back
be,
up?
there's handouts that we brought, so I think on the handouts, there's a picture, and I
Yep.
think the picture has the excavation on it.
Yeah,
So you can see the header line. and
right,
then-
I could see that, yeah, and that's
Okay.
that same line, but you got extra, there's more valves just like the one that had failed probably around that area, right?
So there's other gaskets, and we actually looked at those gaskets at the same time.
Right, I imagine you inspected them pretty good while you
We-
pulled all
we
that soil
looked at- we
around.
looked at the
I mean,
torque.
you can't get a better time to do it than that.
Yeah, we looked at the torque on those flanges.
Right.
Made sure that they were at the proper torque.
Okay,
But once Shane puts this back up, there's actually 2 pumping stations at this site.
okay.
It-
I thought that was like one line, but multiple
So-
injection points or
So
whatever you wanna call
right
it.
here, this is line 6. That's
Yep.
where, and obviously that's what we're talking about tonight.
Right,
This pump building over here is line 14,
okay,
which is a different line.
right,
This was installed in 1996 on line 14.
sure.
So, and then the main lines actually run right through the middle of the station here.
Right,
So,
Okay.
and there's 4 main lines there.
All right, but you're only repumping at 2 of those, or you're only
Correct.
2 of those are getting boosted up right here in Cambridge?
Correct.
The rest, the other lines are just going right through?
They're just passing through.
Through
Correct.
that area,
Yeah,
okay.
so like, for instance, line 61 up in Marshall, right by Little America, there's a pumping station there for line 61 and line 6.
Okay.
And then going south in just on Highway 59 and outside Whitewater on the west side, there's pumping stations for line 6, line 61, and line 13, which is that condensate line that I said that goes north.
Okay, all right. I know I kind of looked into, doing some well testing. I know you guys don't want to, like you said, do it for everybody. But when I reached out to a water tester, what test is a pertinent test that you recommend? She said, you can spend a lot of money to do a water testing. So if we're doing water testing, are you recommending that, are you looking for sulfurs? Are you looking for potable water? Are you looking for VOCs? What, if anybody wanted to do a test on their own personal well to get a baseline today, and let's just say, well, maybe you want to wait 6 or 7 years, and then you do another one to get your, so you're kind of doing a test that you think makes sense, You're not buying just a potable water test. You're kind of testing what does the DNR feel is the right test to say you want to do on your sample?
Yeah, if we're speaking just in general?
Yeah, just in general.
Yeah, it's really up to the homeowner. I know for example, the Wisconsin State Lab of Hygiene offers a couple different packages based on where you're located. I'm a private well owner myself, and I've ran I think it's called like a homeowner package, and it runs metals, VOCs, does like a trizine screen, which is like organic, like agrochemical screening, stuff like that. So it kind of really depends, where you're located and what you want to look at. But those VOC scan is a common package, as is the metal scan, because I think there was a comment before of like VOCs, in the environment, and there are naturally occurring, as maybe a lot of folks know, arsenic and nitrate, more of those type of compounds that are a bigger issue in groundwater. So there's just a variety of options.
Right, and
yeah,
and so normally water, oil's going to float on top of water. So is it a pretty low chance? I know my wells, our well is dug down 140 feet. Our pump's at about 70. So because they dig down and then they get to a spot, but they don't send the well all the way down, so you get better flows. So I know there's all the different harder rocks and all this and the different layers. It'd take quite a bit for it to percolate down, but how do you guys feel on that? I mean, what's your take on it? Most probably drilled wells are probably at least 100. I'm just guessing, in the area. You can go to any well digger, and all the wells are pretty much on the well site. And then I know when we were building the house, they kind of know roughly how far they got to go to get good water.
Right. So I can speak generally to that, not only on well placement and construction, but also kind of contaminant breakdown and fate and transport. So, and we had a good example earlier on. I think there was a gentleman that referenced like a Sandpoint well that was maybe 40 or 60 feet or something like that. Wells are constructed to have protection from contaminants, be it naturally occurring or anthropogenic or something like that. So having that well casing in place to be cased into a deeper aquifer certainly offers a level of protection, dependent on the contaminant and dependent on water quality. There's aesthetic issues with water that we probably have dealt with as private well owners, be it iron or whatever the case. But from a contaminant standpoint, that wellhead or that casing is put in for protection. Depends on the contaminant that we're talking about. And if we're talking about petroleum hydrocarbons, they don't partition to water rather well. If they degrade and break down over time, you get some dissolved compounds that can make their way into the water. I don't think there's any fixed timeline and when contaminants move, because it's based on groundwater chemistry, how quick the groundwater's flowing, so the hydraulic conductivity. If you have a real sandy environment, waters move a little bit quicker than like a clay or silty environment. It can also be a blessing when it comes to these compounds breaking down. Shane alluded to it earlier, and just generally speaking, petroleum hydrocarbons have the advantage of natural attenuation. Natural attenuation is the natural chemical breakdown of these compounds over time. Some contaminants that we work with, and I've been doing this for, I don't know, 18 or 19 years, are much more persnickety or much more recalcitrant and difficult to treat than others. So put those wellheads in to provide some protection. Mother Nature can do its thing and provide some breakdown of those chemicals. It's just hard to predict kind of the timeline of that. So does that answer the question?
No, I just wanted to, how you thought it would, because there's a lot of harder rock layers.
Yeah,
I know,
it
I know our casing
depends.
goes down pretty
Yep.
deep too. I don't know I don't remember that. I just remember how deep it was and where the pump was. I don't remember how far the casing was, but I know what you're saying. There's a casing, and they put
Yep.
that slurry in there, and they.
Yeah,
when they drill
and they're
the well.
designed to be protective
Right.
for those reasons, right? It's kind of like the way mound systems are designed for septic, right? It's to allow time for Mother Nature to work before it reaches the groundwater, right? If it's microbes or
Right.
you name it, it's just providing that level of protection. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think
So
that's
we
pretty
do
much all
have
I had.
the contact information on the town's website. So if you do want to reach out to the DNR, you can about getting well tested. You can also reach out to the county as
Right.
well. They have information too about that.
Well,
and you
I
can-
just reached out to a pub, like a couple well testers, or, water testers, but, there's a lot of different things you can test for, and you can, each test is, X dollars, X dollars, X dollars, You can spend a lot of money if you want
Right.
to start testing for everything, so that's why I just wanted to know what you were really looking for. I mean, you can get the potable water test, you can get the, I just didn't know if there's something we want to test for more on the VOCs and.
Well, and you can, and these are the questions that I know our
Right,
team would be
and-
more than happy to answer.
Yep.
And it's, as a private well owner, taking those considerations.
Yeah.
Just using, if you're next to a gas station and you have a private well, you can make some conclusions on, or maybe there's not an agricultural field to be had and you're in the middle
Right.
of, you could make another conclusion that but if you want the whole kit and caboodle, like myself, I just ran everything, even though there was the odds of picking up a certain kit were low, so it's really up to the homeowner.
Health department might be another good resource.
Yeah, the county health
Absolutely.
department will be able to help. Just people in general should get their wells tested.
Right.
And frequently, maybe annually even for certain compounds. And there's, you can get some information on that. We can provide that, or the
Sure.
county.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, guys.
Thank you. We did hear John Tilp. Did you want to come up? You weren't sure. You're good? I'm just reading who wrote something down. If someone else, after we go through the list, wants to come up, that works. Warren Johnson? I'm good. You're good? Meg, Turtle Heights. Come on up, Meg.
Hi,
Hi.
Meg Turtle Heights, N2511 Evanston Road. And I just had a couple questions. I appreciate you guys all coming out and giving us some additional information. So you mentioned in the work plan that you plan to do. Does DNR have any say on that? Because my understanding is they develop the work plan and say, this is what we're going to do. Do you ever come back and say, no, we want more frequency?
Absolutely. We
Okay.
review and comment based on the information that's been provided. Yep.
Okay. I was wondering about monitoring up and downstream as well as at the site. I know initially it was only at the site, which wouldn't tell us whether there's stuff coming in off the highway, whether there's another source further upstream, et cetera. And so I'm wondering how often you plan to sample that site and how far up and downstream do you plan to?
I think that'll be a conversation that we'll need to have with Lake Ripley Management District.
So are you expecting that the lake is going to be doing all that and not Enbridge?
No, I would expect that we would take care of that.
You're going to
The
get
one
some of that?
sample, I mean, if I went back to the slide, we did get an upstream sample that was on the north side of 18. For that very reason, you get a lot of runoff off the roadway, oils and whatnot that you'll get washed down into the creek.
Okay. And so then a question I have is, will you show the line that comes through there, that blue line that shows
Yep.
kind of the movement of the pipe and of the groundwater, right? The groundwater is moving southeast and so is the pipe.
So the The groundwater, that arrow's right there. The
Yeah,
pipe
that's-
is more diagonally, more like that.
Okay, so at one point when I was reading the report, it suggested that some of that might be moving along the bed of the pipe, which is above the water level.
So, yeah, so basically, right, and I think there's graphics on the back, but there was the picture of the station header. That's all the way up by the building, and that's where I think that you're getting that information from. It wasn't out at the main line. The main line, oops, I keep trying to get around Shane's
Lean
head
back
here.
Get him in the eyes, get him in, yeah.
The main line's out here. It's probably about 150 feet away, 200 feet away from the source area.
Okay, so there's not any concern that any of that's gonna follow the lines, which would then potentially be crossing the creek at some point, where we would have to be wanting to think further downstream as being the potential entrance point if anything came in.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
that's
so-
a not concern,
No, I
or
mean,
is a concern?
based on our, the initial investigation that we've done and the excavation that we have and what we see as residual, we don't see that as being a concern.
Okay. And then basically my last question is just that action levels are higher than no pollution. And so one of those questions, when we're looking at impacts potentially to the surface waters that enter Lake Ripley, at what point do you look at that and say, okay, well, this is below an action level, but we are now adding pollutants to Lake Ripley?
So we can regulate to the standards that have been given to us. There are considerations that are taken into account if there's like an active discharge, and that kind of ties into the WSTAT 292 is essentially the spills law and how we regulate hazardous substance discharges. So when it comes to analytical data, you know, we are primarily held to the standards that are set forth, you know, if surface water standards or groundwater standards.
And so are there recommendations for what the Lake District does in the event that some of those levels
This
come
does
in?
fall into an active spill, right?
Correct,
So
and
this
that's
goes into that other level of urgency that you will look at.
correct. That's when I was mentioning the whole 292 aspect where we can interpret what's going on, the grander picture, you know. And that ties into responsible parties doing their diligence to understand what's going on with their discharge, kind of like collecting an upstream sample. That's something that we see happen a lot, or an up gradient sample in an urban environment where there may be multiple discharges. They still have a responsibility, a responsible party in general, to address their discharge, but that's true. You know, there's those considerations where if there's nothing else going on, if that's a potential pathway, it needs to be addressed. But when it comes down to, like, you know, the analytical, like a grab sample, we regulate to, you know, what the standard would be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I mean, just making sure that there's that communication
Yep.
is going to be ongoing to be concerned about.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Meg.
Thanks, man.
Melissa Gerner? Do you want to come up?
So thank you for your time this evening. I have had the pleasure of pretty much living on this line my entire life. My family farms along a lot of it. I am actually one of the two houses that also had our wells tested. So I appreciate Enbridge doing that. But I do have a few things that I have some questions on. Obviously, we're all here for transparency, clarity. So I am going to clarify one thing before we get started, because every time it's said, it kind of makes me jump. That's actually a drainage ditch that runs through there. It's not a creek. That's a ag drainage ditch that farmers from throughout the township, the two townships through there, actually paid for many, many years ago and continue to maintain. So if we're going to use the correct terminology, drainage ditch is what that is. It still is helping with the flow of water through there, so it's important and is super important to our operation as well. But that being said, you know, obviously I live right next door to the pump station. I'm just to the west of there on the same side, so I see it every day. We weren't notified for over a month, or about a month, that there was an issue there. I knew that there was work being done. There's always someone there. They're always doing something, so I wasn't super concerned at the time. But I guess from a DNR perspective, what is the expectation of notifying the landowners that do touch directly to the pump station when there are spills like this? Should we have been notified earlier? And also, if the tests that they continue to monitor those boring sites shows that it's spreading, how soon can we be expected to be notified that, hey, we might need to do something a little bit different here?
Yeah, those are great questions. I mean, sampling frequency, I don't know, Shane, if you want to speak to that.
No.
You know, if site conditions change and
Oh,
follow
yeah,
up, that
yeah.
Enbridge would.
The site yeah, the frequency of sampling would change. And I do appreciate the info about the ag drainage ditch, because when you look to the north, it disappears within about a mile, and I presume that it was drainage off of the fields. What was your other?
So my question is, though, if the samples that you're going to continue to take samples from, if those test sites show that it is starting to spread, how soon can we expect, since we are the direct landowners around there, to be notified that, hey, like we might have to test outside, or you need to do more wild samples?
As soon as,
of our
if
soil?
we were to confirm that things had changed, you would get notified right away. And I apologize on behalf of the company that we didn't notify you sooner. I think it was mostly the circumstances of this particular release, with it being below ground, and then having to investigate to determine the actual extent of it. And I believe you were notified about a month later, so on that 11th. So once we did all those borings and realized, okay, here's our footprint, yeah, let's let adjacent landowners know what's going on.
Yep.
But I do apologize, we should have let you know sooner.
I mean, I feel like we should have probably been one of the first calls, because we talk to your reps on almost a weekly basis about stuff. So there is that. I will say that we've tried to get a hold of the DNR and ask questions. We've talked to a few folks. I would like to get contact information from the two of you before we leave, because I feel like, again, being the surrounding landowners, we might, we probably should be involved in some more of those conversations.
Yeah.
My other question for you then is, there's currently, and has been for the last several weeks now, 24/7 security. Is there something that we should be, as residents that live right there, that we should be concerned about? Has there been threats or something like that? Because there's security trucks parked out there, one during the day, two at all night. Is
Well,
there?
there have been activist groups that have tried to get into the facility, and so we've stationed security there to make sure that those people don't have any unauthorized entries.
Okay. Again, is that something that we should be notifying the residents within a very localized area that, hey, there's been another incident or something like that? I guess I've got small children. We're always out playing, you know, they're running around in four-wheelers and stuff in the fields too. I would like to know that they need to be on the lookout.
So since, I'll just speak a little bit to that, I'm not gonna speak in depth about it. Enbridge contacted the police department and the sheriff's department because there are activist groups. This is a known thing that happens with pipelines. It starts way up in, where's the line start, in Michigan somewhere?
Superior.
Superior. So it starts up there. Lots of activists, major activist groups up there mostly. Down here, we do not anticipate that to happen, but the sheriff's department and the town of Oakland is aware that there could be issues with groups coming down here from up in Superior, and then recruiting people down here to basically protest because it's a pipeline. And there are groups that are not happy about that. So we are taking taking this as a security issue, like we would any other type of disaster that would occur within the county. So the police department and the sheriff's department's aware of it, and we are going to be patrolling this area over the next several days throughout the weekend to make sure that there are not issues. What I would ask is for residents that live close to Enbridge to contact the police department. We are not full-time, obviously, you all know that. Contact the sheriff's department so that they can send officers down if you do notice suspicious activities. But because they did have a leak, they do have extra security at the Enbridge site just in case that type of situation does present itself. Okay? Does that answer your question, or do you?
No, that answers it on that. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So my one last question is for the Lake District. I guess you were doing samples. When Enbridge did my sample, they had the environmental group doing it, but Enbridge rep came with them. I'm doing my own private sample for my wall as well. Are you guys having Enbridge send the tests in, or are you doing it yourself?
We already did. The results are already posted.
But did you send the
We
samples
did.
in yourself? Okay, so
Leanna
it
went
wasn't.
down with myself on one
Okay.
test, and then Leanna went down on the
Okay,
second.
that's what I was just asking, because they took the sample for me, which is why I'm doing a different sample, just to make sure, not that I don't trust you, but that's.
No, we independently did.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, so, that's all I had, thank you guys.
All right,
Thank you. Was there any other resident now that you've heard everything that you would like to come up and speak? Oh, yeah, Sheila, come. Yeah.
Thank you guys for being here, and thank all of you for being here as well. People have asked questions of us all the time, so we try to do the best we can to answer those. The work plan that you will be putting together and will include the monitoring system, methods, locations, timeframes, correct?
Correct.
And then would it be reasonable to think that the monitoring may also need to be driven by weather events? For instance, heavy rains and things.
Yeah.
The Lake Ripley Management District has done a fantastic job of, studying water in this area and the impacts of heavy rains and things like that on the lake. And I almost have to think that there's a possibility that similar types of things could affect the potential movement of any of this, from one place to the other.
Yeah, if the management district has information on the flow of the creek that's adjacent to the facility, we would definitely be interested in that, and we'll consider that as part of our work plan.
I would, yeah, rather than just a time-driven,
Yep.
it would be more, it would include a weather event-driven, based on water movement, that may carry product from one area to another depending on how it's lodged in the underlying area presently.
Yep.
So that would be something that you.
Yep, we'll consider that.
I'd like to see that addressed.
And then we would like to try to unburden you if you're getting lots of calls too, so we can leave you some numbers tonight, so that if you are getting calls, you can just direct people to.
Yeah, Laura's
Okay.
provided us with those.
Yeah,
and
we have the
do-
numbers.
We do provide it to people, but nonetheless, another issue is, of course, the water testing. And I feel like just the adjacent area is probably not quite enough. I feel like there should be something, within a reasonable, radius, maybe 1 to 3 miles. And if people want to have their water tested, they
So would it
should
help
be
then
reimbursed.
if we take this topic away of the testing, we'll consult with the DNR and the local health department and kind of let the health department guide what they feel is a reasonable proximity to this location for testing?
And
Would
have
that-
residents be reimbursed for it?
Well, what I'm saying, I guess, is that through the DNR and the health department, we'll let them define what they feel a reasonable range is. And then residents within the circle that we'll draw, Enbridge will pay for testing.
That would be, I think that's definitely something, a step, that's better than where we're at right now.
Okay.
Because that is definitely a deep concern for people, and I feel like we need to address that, so thank you.
Yep, that way the health department will be involved and we can lean on their expertise.
Right, that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Because whenever we have people's wells tested, we always recommend that they consult with the local health department.
Sure,
to
that makes-
interpret their results and everything.
Right,
so.
and then they can
Yep.
get them independently tested. There can be a specification of the type of test to contain your expense, but if that's reasonable, the health department, again, can make that recommendation. But that way, you're not exposed to, any number of wild charges. So it's a good give and take, I think.
Yep. No,
All right,
makes sense.
thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome.
Thank you. Okay. Well, I want to then, if any residents are, if they don't have any questions. Okay, well, we were just taking questions from the residents today.
It is a public forum. And I'm not allowed to comment, or, never mind.
Well,
No,
okay,
go ahead.
go ahead.
What's your question? Come on up,
Come up.
please.
Thank you. My name is Anita Martin. We live at 261 Pinnacle Drive in Lake Mills. I wanted to thank the DNR folks, Enbridge, you all for having this forum. I think it's really important. When the 2019 spill occurred on line 13, this was not the way this was handled, and I think it's very important. The questions that people asked were excellent, and I learned a great deal. Just wanted to comment on one thing. Mr. Noble mentioned alternative remediation efforts depending on what the work plan and the results of the lab testing, the soil testing and all that would show. And he mentioned the soil vapor extraction, the SVE, and that was something that was implemented based on the findings for the line 13 spill, and that was a couple years after the spill. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you for letting me speak.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else?
I've got a question.
Yes.
Go ahead. So appreciate all the interest this evening, and is there interest to do something like this again in a few months?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
Right. So we will invite them back when it seems like a good time, when you have a lot more information to share at a.
Yep, we'll get more technical next time.
Maybe there's a work plan.
Right.
maybe
When,
by then
Yeah.
you've got some
Mhm.
Yeah, we can share the work plan and what we've done between now and then. And
Mhm.
Is there an opportunity to provide public comment to the DNR prior to the approval of the work plan after Enbridge submits said work plan to the DNR?
You can contact our team with whatever you may have. I mean, you can.
Can we do it here?
Yeah, you can talk to me or talk to Isaac about any of the concerns you might have. Absolutely, that's why we're here.
Right.
And it's a process, right, in this review.
Yep.
And a lot of what we do is interpretive, right? It's data driven. There's multiple. It's not just one street. It's multiple streets, and those considerations are taken into account to make sure that all of the core. Yeah.
Well, I think the question is, can we participate in the approval process?
You can provide comment and provide thoughts, absolutely. I mean, we're never, if folks want to contact us, sure. Do we have forums where, we have a committee standing in front as we're reviewing it to provide comments on it? We don't, but we have quite a few folks that each year contact us when they're looking at everything's available on BERTS, and they'll review a document and say, I think this. And we can take those comments. We'll never turn anyone away. We're professionals and we're really good at what we do, but any suggestion we take. So, but I wouldn't say there's a formal process or anything like that for like an open public comment as we're reviewing a remedial action plan.
Is there any requirement for the local township to have an approval process or be involved in that process with the DNR?
I think it depends on what their level of involvement would like to be. How they're aware. I mean, I always like to keep an open level of communication with local officials on these events and what's going on. But it depends. Some municipalities, some local agents get a lot more involved than others. So it's really up to their level of involvement.
And
So
we
we'll
are very involved.
we
with
are
the
very.
Indiana town, so if that's what I hear you saying, we will have
Yeah, we will.
participation in that decision-making as experts in this area.
Yeah, we will be talking to them. I actually am an environmental engineer who has done a lot of work, so I can speak very technically to them, and I have. So, we will continue with that as we move forward. If I have any questions and I feel that something isn't quite right or have suggestions, I would do that as well. if they have something online, if they're, you know, you want to contact them or contact us. But as we move forward with our, we'll have updates as well. We'll be having announcements during our regular monthly meetings. If anybody wants to come for those for just a little bit less of a formal setting like this, but just for a quick update, you know, we'll be doing that as well. So we'll just be keeping everybody informed, and, you know, people can continue to question and ask whatever they feel is important to them, and so everyone feels safe, you know.
And these asks are not very uncommon. You know,
No.
we have had municipalities, local health departments, lake districts be much more involved and much more hands-off. And not one may not better than the other. It's just a difference in level of involvement, awareness, and ability to assist too. You know, to have sampling ability, that doesn't happen that often.
I think what I'm hearing people say, though, is that it would be interesting to have another situation like this where you can present your initial work plan and people have an opportunity to see it and digest it, and maybe a period of a week that they can ask questions and make comments before something is approved. Does that sound like it?
Ultimately, that's exactly what people are fishing for.
Yeah, I mean, that's the ask.
400 of us can send emails to the DNR.
Right.
I guarantee, you know what I mean?
Well,
That's
and
cool,
right.
That's neat.
And
But
if we're
we have elected officials here, we can hold accountable.
Yeah, and if we're thinking like efficiency's sake, you know, I'm very passionate about what I do and explaining the science behind what we do, and then obviously wrapping it into the administrative code and the statutes that we are held by. So if we do have that, if we had more technical information, we would love to explain it. And Enbridge can present, or whatever responsibility can present, where we put a well here, or we're proposing this remedial action in this spot. Somebody will say, this is better, and we can talk about that, and we can explain it. You know, Anita brought up the SVE, soil vapor extraction, right? What is that? You know, we still, probably most of you don't know what that is yet, but if we need to talk about that, then we talk about it. So yeah.
The more we learn about all of
Right.
this,
That's, I
better
think, the
off we
point.
are
Yeah.
going to be going forward about everything else.
Right.
Clearly, we have interested constituents, so I think that it would make sense as a next step.
Yeah, I think in our next meeting, maybe we can have some kind of a start to this plan. And you can start to explain, you know, what this plan might look like to everyone, and as we move through other meetings, we can slowly build on that and try to get an idea what that is. Right?
Yeah. And I think it's helpful for the department to put everything into context, you know, because we do this every single day. There's thousands of sites around the state, and then explaining the process. You know, we've been talking about a work plan and just the work plan. Sites can have multiple work plans, changes. We had a question on the comments that we provide back, and then there'll be a revised work plan to get it to where we need it. And then they complete the work from that work plan, and it still may not be good enough, and there may be another plan, you know, and that's that process. Right. Then when the plan's done, then there's a report that's submitted, like a site investigation report that can kind of go through and receives the same level of review and scrutiny. And then concurrently or after that, there's a remedial action plan, and some remedial actions have been taken, but there are other ones that have been proposed. That'll be baked into these as well. So there's still multiple levels of report and review and data collection that are going to occur until closure, and that's another step and another process and another effort to reach that finish line. So, but I think helping explain not only the technical, but that process is helpful. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So we will set up another meeting, and in the future, once you have more information, and we'll announce that at least a week or two in advance so people can put that on their schedule. And in the meantime, please reach out to the town, the county, the DNR, Enbridge. We do have those contact information on the website. We'll try to get it so it's a little bit easier for people to see. And then we will just, we have our next meeting the third Tuesday. Does anyone know what day? 21st. So we'll probably have some more information at that time, at least a small, a next board meeting, monthly meeting. We'll, you know, if we have any information to share at that time, if there's been any new developments, we will most certainly share that with you. And we'll put that on the website as well. So thank you for coming. Oh, yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes, it'll be up on YouTube. I'm not quite sure within the next couple of days.
Should be within the next couple of days.
Within the next couple of days, you can look for it. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming and all the.
I'm gonna go provide my contact info.
Oh, yeah, I would have walked out.